The story or stories you are about to hear are to entertain. The writers of these stories may claim they are true, yet they may not be. That is up to you to decide. After all, this world is a strange one. Cryptids are creatures who have only been claimed to exist, not proven. But everyday folk like you and I see strange and often terrifying beasts around the world every day. So, here are a few creepy cryptid stories to keep you up tonight. If you have a story like these, share it with us at darkstories.org so I can narrate it. Up next, I might be doing middle of nowhere stories. Mr. Nightmare's recent upload on the same theme was just a coincidence, I can assure you. Now, enjoy the stories. By the Light of the Moon, from Anonymous. It was only recently that my family and I moved into our first purchased home. Now, debt isn't the greatest thing, but having a mortgage kind of feels like it. We rented forever, never really feeling like we had control over what we lived in. But now we do, and I don't think we could have been happier until the sightings started. We live out in the rural part of a rural town. In front of the house, there's trees for miles, and behind it, more trees for more miles. Yet somehow we can get internet up here, which is a godsend. The one neighbor we have is extremely quiet, so it's really peaceful here. As soon as we moved in and got everything settled in, we wanted to start a garden, planting fresh fruits and vegetables, even bought a couple of rose bushes, which really accented the old fence that was already on the property when we arrived. Everything sounds good so far, I know, but one thing I didn't like about the place was the master bedroom. Sure, it was big enough, but the side of the bed that I slept on was close to a large window. A window that, honestly, kind of creeped me out. That may sound childish for an adult to say, but I'll be frank with you. I don't think I ever got over my childhood fear of the dark. Not entirely. There would be nights where our rotating fan would cause the curtain to kind of lift away from the window, then fall back down, every so often revealing the outside to me, and me to the outside from the glass. I would often lay awake at night sitting there, watching the curtain rise and fall, seeing through the glass, wondering what might appear there one day, wondering what was in the woods beyond the fence that could be looking back. I've always had a morbid mind about things. I am the kind of guy that, if you find me on a cliff's edge, I'm probably thinking, I wonder what it'd be like to just jump off. From that window, you could see the fence and the forest beyond, as well as some of our garden. In the morning, it was quite a delightful sight, something nice to wake up to. Every morning when I rose out of bed, I would first open that curtain and get a good look outside. But I never dared to open that curtain myself at night. This brings me to my first experience with the thing that seemed to haunt our property. My wife was fast asleep. It was around 4 a.m. Something you should know about me is that I've always struggled with sleep problems. They often came at random. I could go weeks with sleeping just fine, and then there would come nights where I just couldn't sleep, no matter how long I sat there with my eyes closed, no matter how comfy I was. It was one of those nights. I had laid there for literally around 6 hours as we went to bed at 10. My eyes had been closed the entire time. I wasn't stressed or anxious or anything. I'm not really sure why I couldn't sleep. God, do I hate nights like that. I wasn't facing the window at that moment, but at one point I decided to flip around to give that side a try. As I did so, I glanced at the window and saw that the curtain was rising, thanks to the fan stirring it up. I quickly, almost instinctively shut my eyes, because I didn't really want to know what was outside the window. To aid in my feeling of security, I pulled the blankets up to my cheekbones, which caused the blanket to overlap my vision in a way that covered the window. I was snug then, and I tried to go back to sleep. the sound of the ceiling fan and the rotating fan both whirring, while my wife snored lightly here and there. It was peaceful, but there soon came another sound. It was coming from in front of me, just beyond the wall where the outside was. It was a heavy but slow and deliberate thud, like the footstep of a careful but heavy man. After the third thud, it stopped for a while, and I was trying to come up with explanations as to what it was. Maybe it was a pine cone falling from an especially tall pine tree, which we had plenty of around the property. It could have been a bear, but I didn't think one could get over the fence, not without me hearing it. As it went quiet from that side again, I closed my eyes and focused once more on rest. 1 second, 2 seconds, 20 seconds went by, and the sounds came back. Another slow, steady couple of thuds. They were getting closer to my window. That night was a full moon night, and the way the moon sat in the sky, it beamed almost directly through my window, a pale gray-blue nightlight that would usually help me fall asleep, but not that night. As the thuds grew closer to the window, a figure overlapped the moonlight, causing me to see a very detailed silhouette behind that curtain. More than ever, I prayed that the curtain did not rise again. Without even knowing what I was doing, I had lowered the blanket from my cheekbones. I had a full view of the curtain, which now sat motionless against the window like it should have been. Yet I knew at any second the fan would come rotating back around and cause it to rise again. Thanks to the brightness of the moon, this silhouette was very, very clear, looking more like a sharp outline than a blurred shadow. What I saw, it really disturbed me. It was tall. The sharp tips of its ears reached the top of the window, which was nearly to the ceiling. From the top of its head down to its shoulders, it was furry, with long, ragged hair. It looked like a disheveled lion's mane. I could also tell it was standing on 2 legs, but when I looked down at its legs, I saw a bend in them that was backwards and angular, as if you had someone standing straight up and you kicked their knees in as hard as you could. Seeing this made me swallow hard. I kept looking though, going from its knees to its shoulders, which were broad. It was like some sort of demented incarnation of a burly, bearded mountain man. That's what I was hoping it was. A man. I think dealing with some sort of intruder or peeping Tom would have been much easier to handle in my mind. But then my dog, which we kept in a different room overnight, barked, causing the figure to turn its head at a 90-degree angle. Whatever it was, it had a snout. It was no man. I pulled the blanket back up over my eyes, and I prayed that it would go away. I prayed that this was a nightmare. With a thud, and another few thuds, the figure disappeared, and I heard no more thudding sounds for the remainder of the night, which I did not sleep. Rather, the following day I slept a couple of hours on the couch. I did tell my wife about this experience, which creeped her out almost as much as I was scared. Having no further experiences for the next couple of months, it was at the back of our minds. Every now and then I would wonder what it was, but I think by then I'd convinced myself it was a misshapen and exaggerated shadow of some small animal. Nothing to be scared of, I thought. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Every night before bed, I take the dog outside, walk him around the property. We usually go along the fence together, because he enjoys taking in the smells between the fence posts. This night was not a full moon. I remember it being a crescent shape instead, so it was awful dark. I found myself speeding along the fence until I reached where the floodlights are at the corner of the house, which lit up a particular part of the fence, but only that part. The rest of it was quite dark and shadowed. My poor dog, who wasn't on a leash by the way, always felt the need to follow me when we were outside, and since I was power walking my way to the floodlight every lap of the fence, the poor guy felt as if he didn't have enough time to sniff his usual spots. By the 4th or 5th lap, I felt as if I was getting enough steps in. I figured another would do it. I would start one more lap beginning at the floodlight. But I never got that extra lap. Because as we made it to the lit corner of the fence, my dog stopped and started to growl. A very subtle and low growl, one that I almost didn't hear at first. It was like he was frightened, too frightened to growl normally. "What's wrong, boy?" I said. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes glued to one part of the fence. I looked at that part, didn't see anything weird, then looked back. Still, he wouldn't budge. He would only breathe, then continue that low, weird growl. What is with you? I thought. I decided to be a little bit more thorough and walked closely to the fence, having a bit too much bravery thanks to the floodlight. I slapped 2 hands at the top of the fence, preparing to lean over it, until I looked straight ahead at the top of the fence between my hands. I didn't see it before. When I was looking back and forth from my dog's gaze to the fence, I had been tracing or following his eye level, as that's where he'd been looking. But when I placed my hands at the top of that fence, there was a 3rd hand in between mine. One whose skin was a pale blue or gray, with patches of gray or silver hair all over almost randomly. And this hand, it was twice as large as mine, whose fingers ended in wretched and almost rotten-looking nails. Sharp nails. I stood frozen, horrified. I couldn't believe I let myself get this close to something this bizarre. What even was it, though? Whatever the hand belonged to, it was using the fence to lower itself and prop itself against. I could hear it. It was sniffing the ground on the other side, getting the scent of something. Keep in mind that this is a privacy fence. It was 6 feet tall. Being a shorter man, about 5'10", I would have to jump, pull myself up, or stand on my tiptoes to be able to look over. But I was not about to do that. If that thing on the other side, crouching down, was too preoccupied to have noticed me and my dog, we were going to keep it that way. I took my boy inside, and we shut the door as quietly as we could. Yet despite how quiet and calm we seemed, my heart was pounding, racing a mile a minute. I don't think it had ever beat so fast. I quickly went to my wife and told her. The 2 of us ran back to the door, which had a window on it, facing the backyard. I pointed out the hand, and she saw it too, plain as day. But within the next few seconds, that hand slowly sort of just slid down from its position, reminding me a lot of that scene from Jurassic Park, when the T-Rex's hand sort of just flops off the wire. We never did see it stand up. Maybe it wasn't 6 feet tall. Or maybe it crouched down there longer than we thought it did. And when it did get up to leave, we weren't there to see it. The thought of that really scares me. This brings me to the final sighting I had so far with this thing. At this point, my wife and I were quite aware that there was something creepy, something weird, lurking in our neck of the woods. After that night with the weird hand, we stopped letting the dog out on its own during the day. Day or night, we would be out there to walk with it within the fence. I don't know what I would do if that thing climbed the fence again, if it was the same thing as before, and did something to my dog. But once again, the months go by, and time has this way of making things in the past seem less of a big deal. It can soften trauma, make light of the dramatic, and soon the sightings I had had with this creature became nothing more than coffee table talk with family and friends that we would invite over. It was a joke now. Oh, it was just a man in a werewolf garb trying to scare you. Nah, what you saw was Bigfoot. He just wants his privacy too. Those were the things that were said. I was foolish not to be scared. I started to want to get in shape again. I had put on a decent bit of weight over the recent winter, so I saved up for new running shoes and some running clothes, as well as a Fitbit, and I started to jog the dirt road circle we lived on. It was about a mile-long loop. I would go down the driveway, go right, and eventually I'd come back on the left. One particular day, we were busy in town for way too long, so when I got home, figuring that I could still fit in my nightly mile, I threw on my running clothes and went out. It was about an hour and a half later than usual, and I way overestimated how much more daylight was left. Because halfway through the mile, to my suspense, the sun was down, and it was dark. Imagine yourself alone in the dark on a mountainous road with woods for miles to the left and right. The only way you can go is a half a mile through more bends on the road before finally making it back home. That was the situation I put myself in. Part of me wanted to run as fast as I could the rest of the way, but when I tried, I stopped after a few seconds because my running was so loud, it made it impossible to hear clearly around me, and the thought of not being able to hear around me correctly made me feel more panicked. So instead, I walked lightly. That way I thought I'd be sure I would hear something if it was coming up on me. Luckily for me, it was a brighter, nearly full moon that night. I think it was called a waning gibbous. I can't be sure though. But there was plenty of light to see up and down the road. The trees to my left and right were awfully big, sure, but they didn't really stretch out over the road. With the moon where it was above me, there was enough light to light my way. That's why when I looked back at one point, I saw it all too clearly. That same silhouette I'd seen in bed so long ago. Tall, pointed ears, ragged mane, backwards bent legs. I saw that dark figure standing, quite obviously taller than my privacy fence, about 20 yards away from me. Way too close. It was just standing there. I couldn't tell if it was facing away from me or towards me. I tried to breathe, but choked. I didn't stop walking. I instead started walking backwards, watching this thing. The entire time I repeated the phrase, "Oh no," in my head at least 100 times. As I began taking steps, careful steps, the figure began to walk too, its arms rising and falling at its sides the way a person would walk. So was it a person in a suit? Someone who decided to terrorize me in a very realistic-looking suit for months? Yeah, that's all it was, I reminded myself. So, having convinced myself of that, I called out to the figure as I walked. "That's not funny. You need to leave me alone. Keep it up. I'll dial the cops." I pulled out my smartphone and clicked the lock button, causing the screen to light up. Then I pointed the screen in his or its direction. They didn't flinch, but kept walking, its steps much larger than my own. It was steadily catching up to me. When 20 yards became about 15, I began to make out details. Patchy silver hair all over, skin that was a gray or gray-blue color, hands with long, sharp nails. This was almost certainly the same creature I saw with its hand on the fence that night. Suddenly, it broke into a full run. Mock me all you want, but I screamed like a child as I turned forward again and started to run, but immediately slid on the dirt road, rocks rolling underneath one of my feet, causing me to fall and scrape my right hip. Now on the ground, I faced the thing running at me, and without full control over my panicking body, my palms raised up to my eyes, covering them, as I waited for sharp, nasty nails to dig into me and teeth to bite down into my flesh. But that didn't happen. I listened to its rapid thud, thud, thud in the gravel. It was in front of me, beside me, then beyond me. The creature ran right past me full speed. I uncovered my eyes, almost unsure at first. Then I stood back up and faced ahead. The creature had stopped, now about 30 yards ahead up the road. It was facing me again, I think. Then, after we stared at each other for a couple of moments, it walked off to the left of me and disappeared in the woods. Screw stealthiness at that point. I took off at a full run myself. I didn't stop until I made it through the front door, panting. Once again, I relayed my story to my wife, who was now scared for me, and told me she did not want me to run my mile around the loop, and instead, if I had to keep running, I could do it inside the fence at least. While that would make for a boring run, I agreed. The fence did make me feel safer, and I could bring the dog out there with me. But I'll tell you this, I wasn't about to go outside after dark for a long time. It's been about 9 months now. I would say I'm overdue for another sighting, but I don't think it's coming back. Or maybe I just hope it's not coming back. It never did show any signs of aggression. If anything, it showed signs of curiosity. It was sniffing around my fence and staring me down. To me, it was like it was just checking us out, wondering if these new people in its territory were dangerous. The same way I was wondering if this thing was dangerous. But I'm not going to believe that 100%. I don't want my guard down if I ever see the creature again. I'm afraid if I assume this thing is not out to get me, if I don't take it seriously if I see it again, I could end up a nice, sloppy, wet meal. If I ever do see it again, I'll be sure to let you know. Help me identify this creature. From Dancing Pan. It was 14 years ago. My boyfriend and I went to a graveyard one night. He had told me a story about how he'd seen something weird there. He didn't really want to take me. He even tried to talk me out of it, but I insisted. He said that he had heard voices about the place, and if you go there and sit every night, you'd eventually see it. He said that he had finally seen the thing himself on the 3rd or 4th consecutive night that he had visited. He described it as very tall, man-like, and gray. But he only caught a glimpse of it, and never went back after that, until I made him. I remember him saying he had car trouble when it appeared also, making his escape much more suspenseful. Well, hearing this, I could not resist. I had to see it. We went 3 nights in a row. On the 3rd night was when I finally saw it. We were sitting in the dark with the moon being the only source of light. Man, were we dumb. We should have brought our own light at least. Suddenly, both of us got creeped out. It was actually the first time we felt that way since starting our visits. The air felt different somehow. We immediately changed our minds about the whole ordeal, deciding to leave and maybe not coming back after all. Lo and behold, my car, which was the one we took this time, didn't start. And my car had never had trouble before, not once. And even after this incident, it wouldn't have trouble starting for another several years. But when we tried to start it, it wasn't having it. I'd never been so terrified in my life. My boyfriend was driving that night and kept trying to start it, but nothing happened. Then the headlights flickered and came on full force. We saw it, standing right there in front of the car. It was 7 feet tall at least. It was pale gray. It looked like a moving statue to me. It was so tall it had to bend over to look at us through the windshield. We were freaking out. Finally, the car sort of shifted and started at last. The creature itself darted off so quickly to the left. I knew that if it came to the side windows after us, we'd both be dead within a minute. It was so unbelievably fast, yet huge. Instead, it stood at the side of the car, watching us. It continued to watch as we drove away. The cemetery was laid out where the gravel road went around the whole graveyard in a circle and looped back around so that the entrance was also the exit. We were spinning tires and slinging gravel the whole way around, but when we passed the place where the thing was, it hadn't moved at all. It had been standing there, watching us go around the gravel circle. It just let us leave, but it was looking directly at me. I knew it. It was the passenger side of the car that was facing it, after all. I couldn't really make out any of its features. It was dark, and what had happened so fast, we had panicked. Well, when I looked at this thing, and it looked back at me, I was overcome with a sense of severe sadness, of depression. It was a feeling I'd never felt in my life, but in that moment, these strange emotions became real. It was like everyone and everything I've ever cared for in my whole life was burned right before my very eyes. The pain and hurt was almost tangible. It took my breath away. That night, when I made it home and finally was able to get some sleep, I dreamt of that thing calling me from the graveyard, begging me to come back. But it seemed harmless, it seemed miserable, as if it was stuck in that old cemetery forever, and it was alone, so alone. When I woke up, I was determined to go back to find the creature, but before I could even tell my boyfriend, I got calls from him and 2 of my best friends. I could not believe what they told me. All 3 of them had had nightmares in which that creature had brutally torn them apart and mutilated me. The 2 girls who called me didn't know anything about the graveyard incident. It was so late when I got back home, I hadn't had a chance to tell anyone about it. I just went straight to bed. My boyfriend dreamt that I had gone back to the place because I felt bad for it, so he had driven out there after me. When he got there, he found it ripping me apart. He said it was as if the thing was searching for someone because it wasn't eating, just ripping and tossing pieces of my body away. For a long time, I had dreams about the thing, saying, "I won't hurt you. Come back. Help me. I am suffering." And for a while, honestly, I had to fight the urge to go back, even after 3 people I cared about told me their nightmares where I would die. The pull to go back isn't strong at all anymore. I guess it faded with time, especially with kids and adulting, but I do think about it often. I do kind of get a little itch just to drive out there, and I don't know. It would be dumb, but there's always been a little nagging voice that whispers about the thing we saw that night. Whatever it was, it had a masculine physique, no genitalia, and its eyes were completely black. No iris, no pupil, nothing. Just black, inky nothingness. I've been searching for answers all these years, but the only things I've seen that look remotely like it are wendigos, the pale crawling humanoid ones, not the ones with fur and antlers. Thing is, wendigo are vicious, bloodthirsty. A wendigo wouldn't have let us leave that night, I wouldn't think. The best way I can describe it is it was a statue, one that moved. Does anyone know what it could have been? It's bugged me for nearly 2 decades now, and any answers, any suggestions, would be appreciated. Bigfoot Clown Car, from Jasper H. Right after I graduated high school, sometime in the early 2010s, I had a close group of friends that I did everything with. It consisted of my girlfriend, Ella, and my two best friends, Sean and Christian. It was early summer, mid-June, I believe. We decided we wanted to take a road trip and hang out in the mountains. We didn't live that far from the most iconic mountain in our state, so we headed that way in Sean's beloved Pontiac. He had affectionately named it Banshee. We packed the works, snacks, drinks, and after some pestering on my part, I was a bit of a safety nut, so I brought along some warmer coats, flashlights, and water. We were going to make a night of it, even if it meant driving back home at 1 in the morning, which we were all very accustomed to do at that point in our young adult lives. We ended up driving up an old, infrequently used logging road and parking near what seemed to be a good spot to start our impromptu hike. We parked the Banshee on the side of the road, which was about a foot away from a ditch that was about 5 feet deep and at minimum 10 feet across. On the other side of the ditch was a copse of small trees, young saplings, no more than 3 inches in diameter. It wasn't really safe to cross the ditch unless you used the narrow trail that cut through the ditch into the woods, so we ended up using that and headed into the woods to start our adventure. We spent the entire afternoon wandering and talking and basically just chewing the fat. Around early evening, we had settled down and started a small fire to keep warm. There was a clearing that we had discovered, and there was a fire pit from previous campers, so we used it to start a new fire. Since summer was only just beginning, the nights were still kind of chilly. This night wasn't any different, and being impulsive young adults, we were beginning to regret coming out without better gear, despite our coats and the fire. It was cold enough that our hands were too numb to open the snacks, so that began to damper our spirits. I was getting especially grumpy, since I hadn't had a lot of sleep the night before. I was getting especially irritable sometime around 9. We had only had junk food in our stomachs, and the smoke from the campfire was giving me a massive headache. At some point, I ended up bickering with Ella over some silly topic that I can't even remember now. I stormed off into the woods to cool off. Even though I knew the fight was silly, it had really upset me, and I was in tears for at least 5 or 10 minutes. I wasn't quiet about it either. When I finally started to calm down, a sound came to my attention. It was a not-so-distant, rhythmic knocking, like someone hitting trees with a stick. I knew it wasn't any of the others, because I was close enough that I could still hear them talking, and I would have heard them approaching, since there was so much debris on the ground. My heart stopped, then started pounding as I listened to the other sounds that began accompanying the knocking. Breathing like a heavy, deep breathing, as if whatever was breathing was getting mad, and I mean angry. The knocking was getting more and more deliberate, intense. It sounded like if whatever was being hit was hit any harder, it would snap. Now, I'm a big fan of myths and the supernatural, and my state is famous for its Bigfoot sightings. Heck, even some of my family have claimed to see Bigfoot. I didn't want to jump to any conclusions, but the first thing I thought of was that Bigfoot communicates by knocking on trees with sticks. My heart was skipping beats. Here I was in the middle of nowhere, and I hadn't had the good grace to grab a flashlight before I stormed off. The knocking, the breathing, it was all getting closer. So, I was out of there. I turned around, heading back the way I came, luckily coming right back to the campsite. The fire had been put out, and my friends were gone. I could hear them calling for me from the direction of the road. I quickly answered them and said that I was coming. The knocking was further away now, but still aggressive and sharp in its retort. I finally made it back to the Banshee, which was idling in the middle of the road. Ella, Sean, and Christian stood near the front of the car, looking just as freaked out as I was. Apparently, they'd heard the knocking too, and decided to call it quits then, thinking that I'd find my way back to the car eventually. Calling me hadn't been an option since there was zero reception out there. I assured them it was fine, but then we had the absolute crap scared out of us. It all happened so quickly, it felt like it was happening in slow motion. There was an eruption of snapping noises, as something huge just casually brushed those saplings aside in the same way a normal person would walk through tall grass. We could see trees snapping like toothpicks in the light from the headlights. The breathing was audible now, along with an angry grunting noise. The next thing we knew, a large humanoid figure, at least 9 feet tall, appeared out of the tree line. It didn't even pause before it leapt over the ditch. It just casually stepped over it, like you would if you were stepping off a curb. It cleared the ditch completely and landed in a crouch in the center of the road, looking at us as it did. We'd been frozen in shock at the sound and the creature's appearance, but when it landed in the middle of the road after jumping the ditch like a kid playing hopscotch, we scrambled, comically so, piling over each other to get into the Banshee. Then we sped away. I remember looking back and seeing it charging after us as we drove away, but it quickly gave up the chase and returned to its woods. We decided after that encounter that we'd just stick to normal, populated areas for hanging out. Areas far away from that thing. The Thing in West Virginia, from Tim R. This story occurred in Parkersburg, West Virginia. Though I was born in Charleston, I moved to Parkersburg when I was 3. I was raised in an isolated area in the mountains. West Virginia is known for its scary monsters and the well-known Mothman. I'm here to tell you about a new type of creature, one you may have never heard of before. I was outside playing with my German Shepherd. I vividly remember it being a nice fall day. All the leaves were golden and the trees were beginning to lose their leaves. Every step I could hear the leaves crunching below me. As I said, I live in an isolated area in the mountains, so my family would have to drive about half an hour to get to town if they wanted groceries or to take me to school. It was evening, so I was bored just running around throwing sticks as my dog attempted to go get them. I always loved the outdoors from a young age, but this event almost changed it for me. As I was messing around throwing sticks, I noticed a stream heading down the mountain. I went over to it, and my dog soon followed. I sat down on a nearby rock and looked up. I could tell it was going to be dark soon. I then heard a twig snap on the other side of the stream. I looked over to see a small squirrel just looking at me. My dog barked and foolishly ran across the stream, splashing me in the process. I ran after him, but soon lost sight of him. I looked around and found that I was indeed lost myself. I had an uneasy feeling, and I just wanted to be back home. I tried to retrace my steps, but I couldn't seem to find my way back. Every second, that uneasy feeling would multiply. I looked around until I found what was giving me that feeling. Until this day, I still regret looking that way. What I saw appeared to be around 8 feet tall. It was skinny and had a weird face, like the face of a bear, but not exactly. The thing had patches of brown fur, but looked to have gotten in a fight with something. It had long, long arms, and that stench that came off of it was insane. I stumbled backwards, and I was just in shock. It seemed like that thing was just as scared of me, though, as it got awkwardly down onto 4 legs and scurried away. The thing reminded me of a stretched-out, hairless grizzly bear. But I'm not even sure if we have grizzlies in West Virginia. Only black bears, I think. And if it was, why did it act that way? Why did it look like that? The thing I encountered made no noise, though. It was silent, and I don't know why. I sat there wondering what I saw, and I finally got the nerve to get up, but my legs were all shaky. I was paranoid. Every minute I was looking behind myself. I tried to run at one point, but I had no sense of direction. I just wanted to run, so I kept going. Eventually, I reached a road. The same road that led me to my house, so I followed it, luckily enough. As I reached almost halfway up the road, my heart sank. I remembered I didn't know where my dog was. I tried to think of an excuse on what to tell my parents about the dog, but what would they think? I walked into my house and went directly to my bedroom. I didn't come out that evening at all. Eventually, I fell asleep and woke up in the middle of the night with that same terrified feeling. Thankfully, the next day, my dog found his way back somehow. I was so relieved, but I could tell he was not the same. After that day, I haven't been to those same woods ever again. I've been too scared to even know. I'm 38 now, but I'm still so paranoid. The Eyes, from Brooke D. My sister and I were one day heading out to her friend's house. Apparently, her friend lived out in the country, and there was a supposedly haunted graveyard near their house. So we left about 8:30 or 9 p.m. We would pick him up and visit the graveyard. This happened in October of 2019, by the way. When we got there and were finally driving up his driveway, on both sides of the dirt road there were these long cornfields. I could reach out my window and touch them, they were so close to us. As we pulled into his driveway, we saw this black little animal that looked like a skunk, but it didn't have any white on it. We called it a skunk and left it at that. We picked up her friend and talked for a bit. 5 minutes later, as we were driving back down the dirt road, I was sitting in the back passenger seat, looking out the front window. About 10 feet from the car, I saw something sticking its long, stretched out neck over the corn stalks in the field. These corn stalks are taller than me. I couldn't really see the shape of the head, but I could see its bright eyes, looking and blinking at the car. I didn't say anything. I don't know why. I may have been in shock or just curious. But when we got about 5 feet from it, I saw it slowly move its head back into the field. As we drove by where it was, I tried to search for it from the window, but I couldn't find it. We continued on to the graveyard and didn't see anything else. But even my sister said that she felt as if she was being watched the moment we picked our friend up. Thanks so much for stopping by and enjoying these scary stories. Remember, if you have a scary experience of your own and you'd like to have it narrated on the show, send it to us at darkstories.org. As I mentioned before, I'm planning a middle of nowhere episode, but I'm always accepting any kind of scary story you might have. If you want to support the show, check the links in the description. And until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who have supported us. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.